will show the way in wild, troubling times. It brings a brand new day. We choose love, we choose love. Let healing love abound. In the face of hate and fear, may love circle round. The ones who've gone before us, memory in our bones, carry and sustain us, bring us all back home. The ones who are yet to come, guide how we proceed. Garden flowers holding the promise of the seed. We choose love, we choose love. Love will show the way in wild, troubling times. It brings a brand new day. We choose love, we choose love. Let healing love abound. In the face of hate and fear, may love circle around. Let love's power strengthen us, flow within our veins, as we mend what's broken and all that we must change. Together lift our sails, justice by our side. Riding waves of turbulence, we will turn the tide. We choose love, we choose love. Love will show the way in wild, troubling times. It brings a brand new day. We choose love, we choose love. Let healing love abound. In the face of hate and fear, may love circle round. In the face of hate and fear, may love circle round.
Introduce yourself. Tell us why you're running for the legislature and why the delegates should support you.
My name's Anquam Mahmoud. I like to say I was born in San Diego and then raised in the Phillips area of Minneapolis. I grew up in a single family household. My mom worked the night shift to provide for 3 children. And so I personally faced housing instability, lack of healthcare access. And so I ended up wanting to help others overcome these challenges. And so I became an advocate with Isaiah and went through their leadership development program. And here I saw a lot of individuals falling through our cracks, which is one reason I'm really proud that I worked at the state of Minnesota. I worked with MNsure in rolling out the Affordable Care Act in the state of Minnesota as a policy on the policy team as a planning director. Here we made history. We rolled out policy that allowed Minnesotans with pre-existing conditions to enroll in healthcare coverage. And now I work at Twin Cities Health Services, and I am a chief operating officer there. And I work directly with individuals from our community who are from the encampments and underserved communities. We're over on Hennepin Lake. And with these daily interactions that I encounter with our community members and my lived experiences, I want to take those experiences and make an impact at the State House for our community. So that is why I'm throwing my hat into the ring. I no longer want to be an advocate at the door. I want to be a decision maker at the table.
Dave, for the opportunity. My name is Bill Emory. I use he, him pronouns. I am a father. I'm a former community and union organizer and a policy leader, and I am running for State House in District 62B. For the last 5 years, I have served as a policy aide in the office of Hennepin County Commissioner Ira Fernando. And in that time, I have gained experience and learned how to move policy through process and how to achieve tangible wins for our community by getting votes passed and money allocated to serve crucial needs. And I think that's what our district needs right now. Our district has acute and urgent needs, whether it's unsheltered homelessness in Camp Ninukasi or small businesses that are still working to recover from the impacts of civil unrest on Lake Street and on other commercial corridors, or it's trying to figure out what the long-term funding, infrastructure, and programming solution for commemorating and memorializing George Floyd Square looks like in the years to come. I think we have needs within our community that we need to get dollars allocated for. And I think that I have the experience, the skills, and the abilities to work as a listener and in coalition with community leaders to determine what vision people are looking to get funded, and then kind of taking that direction and reaching out at the legislature, of course, directly, and also creating partnerships outside of the legislature to make sure that our core needs get funded in the years to come in the neighborhoods represented in District 62B.
My name is Londel French. I am a former educator, Minneapolis Public Schools. I've educated thousands of kids over the last 19 years working in Minneapolis Public Schools, mostly kids who have special needs. I have worked as a union organizer in the city for the last 7 years or so. So I've done social justice work, helping folks who have been released from prison to regain their rights to vote back, which I think is a super, super important way for folks who have been impacted by the criminal justice system to actually have the right to get, to participate in democracy like everyone else, which is really, really important. Packboard was actually, one of the most fun experiences I've had in my life. I have to actually, get a chance to actually advocate for young folks. Being a youth worker for 20 something years, being able to produce and direct and guide policy to youth workers and to our young folks was extremely privileged. It was a privilege for me to be able to do that work. So, so after, there were some things that were happening at the park board that I really didn't like with the workers. And so I think that was probably one of the main reasons I ran for park commissioners, to make sure that our youth had what they needed in our parks, and the workers who work in our parks, who, they don't make a lot of money, but they do care about our kids. And so I wanted to, make their work experience a little bit better than it was before.
Well, thanks for having me, David. My name is Ira Jourdain. I am a candidate for the Minnesota House 62B seat that's open. I live with my family in Kingfield, precinct 8-4. We have 2 high school kids and soon to be kindergartner starting in a blink of an eye. So we have some cats and we have chickens. So we have a full house over here in Kingfield. My background is in human services, working with families on public assistance. That's been my professional background. Educationally, I have a degree in business management, looking towards starting my MBA, and currently serve on the Minneapolis Board of Education or school board. I'm actually running for the state house because I believe that both my personal experience and my professional experience would be a great asset to not just the citizens of 62B, but also the state. I have lived in 62B for many years. In fact, if you look at 62B, and this is one reason why I think people should endorse me, is that I've seen, how 62B itself has grown over the years, and we actually live in probably, in my opinion, the most racially diverse, but also the most socioeconomically diverse district in the state. And I've seen a lot working in human services with families all over South Minneapolis and in 62B, but also families in North Minneapolis and the suburbs, but primarily here in South Minneapolis. But I've also I've lived in East Phillips for many years. And now I live in Kingfield. So I've seen the economic diversity that our House district brings, and it is something that I believe that I will work extremely hard to bring up everybody, because we have such a diverse economic district. But also, too, a lot of the disparities that we see socioeconomically also play out day by day in the classroom and education, whether you're talking K-12, higher ed, whether you're talking environmental differences in our House district are very clear. And I have the experience of serving on the Minneapolis School Board and tackling some of these issues head on within the purview of the Minneapolis School Board and what we can and cannot do, creating partnerships that I've been fortunate to be a part of. 30 minutes recess for every school. We've tackled environmental policies, moving towards more organic ways of treating our facilities instead of commercialized use of pesticides and herbicides like Monsanto related products. We no longer are moving away from those. We no longer are using them. We have partnerships with the park board to resupply our trees and our shrubs and our flowers. So we are making, we are doing our part in curtailing, harmful things to our environment that are done. Housing is another thing that I've experienced on working professionally in human services, helping families become self-sufficient on public assistance, helping them overcome barriers to become self-sufficient through employment, and covers almost everything under the sun. And that could be, unfortunately, from domestic violence, substance abuse, lack of education, transportation, and of course, it's always housing. Working with families to obtain and sustain affordable housing has always just been a number one issue with trying to help people become self-sufficient, along with childcare, et cetera. So those are things that we've worked on in the school board with our Safe Homes, Safe Schools Initiative, Stable Schools Initiative, working with the city of Minneapolis, Hennepin County Health and Human Services, Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, and a grant with the Pull That Family Foundation to keep our families in their schools and to keep them stable. Because as we all know, having children constantly be moving affects their attendance, affects their learning, affects their reading, literacy, social emotional learning in the schools. So those are all issues that I've worked on, and I've brought to the school board my professional and personal experience and those issues to the school board. And now with what I have learned and things I have worked and strived for in terms of equity and access for all our children and their families and our partners, I want to bring that to the state legislature, and I would be extremely honored to do so. So thank you.
Okay. Well, public safety's been a big part of the conversation in Minneapolis, probably more so since the murder of George Floyd. But you want to talk a little bit about your feelings about public safety and policing, and what you think the legislature could do?
Public safety is top of mind for a lot of folks in the district, and there's many different experiences of that subject. There's, when you say the word crime, that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. I, have been pretty active in using my body and my presence as a way of showing protest to the ways in which MPD has historically had negative and at times brutal interactions with our community members. So I was part of the protests in 2015 at the 4th Precinct in the wake of Jamar Clark's murder, and involved in some of the protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and have been part of that space for a number of years and have been deeply critical of MPD's lack of appetite for reform and on our political leaders over the years, lack of appetite for reform within that department. I think that another side of that, though, that sometimes gets talked about less is how important it is for local law enforcement to be solving crimes and doing the investigative work to make sure that victims' family are able to experience justice. And in some years, MPD's clearance rate for homicides has dropped as low as 60%. And we just have to have policing in our community that is capable of investigating serious crimes, identifying the folks who are causing the harm, and finding ways to hold them accountable for that harm caused. And so I think we need changes at the state legislature that both increase accountability for policing and making sure that the number of negative interactions that are experienced by community is diminished. I would support an end to qualified immunity in particular as a legislative change that should be made. But I also would support changes that would, increase the ability to find and find the people who are creating harm and solving crimes in our community, because I believe that the people that are most likely to commit a violent crime moving forward are ones who committed a violent crime in the past and were not held accountable for that. So I think that the way that we get to increasing local law enforcement's ability to do investigative functions is by taking a critical look at the functions that society and our communities are asking them to perform, some corners of our community that maybe are better served by a professional who can perform those roles without a badge and without a gun, allowing our law enforcement professionals to focus on other areas. And I think a lot of opportunity exists when it comes to emergency response in this space. There was a time when you called 911 and you expected an ambulance to arrive. And right now, I think when you call 911, you expect a police officer to arrive. And I believe that one version of our future that we should be working towards is when you call 911, perhaps it is an ambulance that arrives, or perhaps it's a fire truck, or perhaps it's an officer, or perhaps it's a mental health intervention worker, or perhaps it's a social worker with a clipboard, or some combination thereof that responds appropriately to the emergency that is being communicated. And I think we have a lot of opportunity to move towards that with some technological capabilities that we've observed move into this space. A lot of folks don't know this right now. If you're watching or listening, please take this to heart. You can text 911. If you are in a position where you're experiencing an emergency and you don't feel safe making a phone call, you can text 911 from your cell phone and reach an operator like that. We are reaching a point with 5G service becoming ubiquitous that we are increasingly able to offer video 911 service. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for what types of interventions can we be providing in emergency situations in the time before a first responder is able to arrive on the scene. In Minneapolis, we should anticipate that response times would be pretty fast if roles were clearly defined and institutions were properly directed and supported. But in parts of the state, it could be 20, 30, 40 minutes before a first responder is able to arrive on the scene. And, we could be saving a lot of lives and reducing a lot of harm if there was someone who was able to provide intervention via a video link in the minutes before a first responder arrived. And I think we should be moving towards finding different ways to look at emergencies and making sure that the responses are tailored to the needs that are arising in the case of that specific emergency. So those are some of the ways that I would want to be working and leading and supporting when it came to policing and public safety at the state legislature.
Well, as a person of color, as a Black man who grew up in this country, I've had many interactions with police departments, not just Minneapolis Police Department, but just different police departments. I think it's the job of the legislators to have the purse strings. So what we're funding for our police departments, also to make sure that we're keeping our police in check. So we're doing oversight. We're making sure that the post board has what they need to make sure that these officers aren't out here, being corrupt or doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. I think we should have more oversight from maybe the attorney general, maybe. So there's a few different things. I don't think we need to have when folks are in crisis. I think police are not the folks need to show up. When folks are in crisis, they need folks who are experienced at dealing with folks who are in crisis. And so if we can change the model how our police show up, I think we can have a lot more and better interactions with folks who are marginalized or have had terrible interactions with the police. I think we need to find other people who can show up when folks are in their, or having their worst day. And that's usually what happens when folks are meeting with folks who are, first responders. They're having their worst day. And so let's find a group of people, let's train them, and let's teach them how to deal with folks who are having their worst day.
Yes, I think, well, first off, yeah, I obviously believe police are needed. I think we do need some level of law enforcement and safety in our city, of course. I don't think anyone's going to argue that point. I think one of the things the legislature can do is also look at our post training that we offer in our colleges and universities that train our police officers. Whether you're at Minnesota North College in Hibbing, whether you're at Inver Hills, whether you're at Metro State, majoring in criminal justice, I think how society changes, and I think law enforcement is one of those things that needs to change as well. And I think we need to look at the criteria of how we train our people who decide to pursue a career in law enforcement, because the standards change all the time. Whether you're talking about law enforcement, whether you're talking about teachers, whether you're talking about any career field, standards to be licensed in the state of Minnesota, whether you're licensing for a social work position or whatnot, they change and they adapt with our change in society. And I think law enforcement needs to as well. What might have worked in the 80s and 90s obviously does not work today. And I think we are seeing a wise investment in dealing with mental health supports. And I think that that's something that the legislature can do, is support, changes in our law enforcement, our licensing, and our education, and how we deal with responding to both emergency calls and non-emergency calls. And I think also too, we've recently talked about SROs in schools and the role of SROs in our schools and across the state, and not just in Minneapolis public schools. And we moved them in Minneapolis after the murder of George Floyd. Prior to that, we had a plan to draw them down over the course of time, due to their militaristic presence that they had in the schools. For that, it can be triggering to predominantly students of color, no doubt about it. And so finding other options out there in terms of how police and law enforcement engage our communities, I think is something the legislature can do on a macro level, and on a micro level, how cities can adapt to what the state is proposing on a more macro overlooking the whole state. I think that is one way to start. But I think also to go back to my point of looking at the curriculum and how we educate and teach our law enforcement students across the state. Again, whether you're a community college student in northern Minnesota, here in the metro, or even down at Mankato State or Minnesota State Mankato. So I think that is one way we can look for an equitable solution, along with more mental health supports for our law enforcement officers as well.
So my mom She struggles with mental health issues. And there have been times where the police were involved, and it makes me nervous. I get nervous because I don't know how they will interact with my mom. And there have been times that they were aggressive with her because they didn't understand the episode that she was going through. She has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and diagnosed and undiagnosed with other disorders. I would like to see the first responder to be a social worker, someone who is trained and would handle the situation compassionately and be able to de-escalate. With time, those police officers did know who my mom was, and the interactions did get better over time. But it still makes me nervous because I don't know who's going to be first on the scene and if they have experience with her. I want to work closely with Jason Chavez in being able to fund alternative programs so that we have humane public safety. I've seen this program work. I've seen a pilot program that is in the Cedar Riverside area, where they have peers going around the neighborhood de-escalating violent situations, and it has proven to be successful. They've seen less theft in the small businesses, dramatic decrease in theft in the small businesses. They've seen, and I have this experience because they work with those who are struggling with addiction, and they've brought them into our treatment center over on Hennepin Lake. The
problems of poverty, homelessness has been brought to a fore in our city dramatically by the housing encampments on public lands. What's your approach to these issues?
The summer where George Floyd was murdered, I got a lot of experience working with folks who are unhoused. I learned a lot about, the situations why folks become unhoused. There's a lot of mental health that folks are dealing with. There's a lot of substance abuse that folks are dealing with. I think Minneapolis and St. Paul and Rochester and even like some other bigger cities in Minnesota are kind of taking a brunt on, because a lot of folks, if you're unhoused in Elk River or you're unhoused in some of greater Minnesota, the tendency is for you to gravitate towards one of the larger cities so you can, get the resources from the larger cities. So maybe if we looked at our unhoused population, maybe on the state level and at the county level, we could do a little bit more. We have a little bit more progress. We've looked at our veterans and we've basically ended homelessness for our veterans in the state. I think so. There's models that exist for folks to get off the streets. We have to look at maybe meeting people where they're at. So if folks are dealing with mental health issues, let's get them in the house first and then deal with the mental health issue they're dealing with. If folks are dealing with some substance abuse, let's get them in a house and then we're dealing with their substance abuse. That's the way you get folks off the street, get folks supportive housing. Folks who are in danger of losing their housing, maybe they need some more support and advocates so they don't lose their house. I think we want to spending way more money on trying to get folks rehoused once they lose their house. So let's figure out ways to keep people in the housing that they already have. Also, I mean, with automation that's occurring in this country at the rate is occurring right now, we really need to start having a conversation about a guaranteed minimum income in the next 15 or 20 years, because the jobs just won't be here. So we need to start having those conversations in this state.
Seeing you around the Powderhorn encampment that summer, and you were very active. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience? It's up to you.
No, it's. I mean, I learned a lot. I learned a lot as a person who directs policy. I learned a lot as a those are my neighbors. I live 8 blocks from Powderhorn, so every day I got to go watch and help my neighbors who are in the city was burning. There was a lot of stuff going on in the city, and these folks had nowhere to go. And we just want to make their stay as comfortable as possible and try to make sure they're safe and fed. And that's what we did. I think the issues of unhoused folks is much deeper than folks who have mental health issues or some type of substance abuse. I think there's some systemic stuff like systems that exist that keep people on the streets. There's a so I don't want to yeah it was a wasn't it was a good it was an emotional time for me. I met a lot of good people in really bad places, in really bad spots in their life. So yeah, that's probably all I want to say about that.
I think all three of those are intertwined on some level. When you're talking about poverty, working with families on public assistance, it is very hard, if not impossible, for someone to be on MFIP today and be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment with their child. If you're a parent, I'm talking about specifically if you're a parent of one, that's $537 a month. And there is, I can't even tell you where to begin where you could find a one-bedroom apartment for you and your child anywhere in the state for $537. Maybe there is somewhere out there, I don't know, but I know it's not in the metro. But I think that, when it comes to housing, the state just invested like $1.3 billion in streamlining a lot of their practices in building and retaining affordable housing and naturally occurring affordable housing. I think one of the an easier fix, maybe it is not easy, but I think from my own experience working is find out ways to people getting taken advantage of by predatory landlords and or rental companies when it comes to housing court, specifically talking about unlawful detainers or evictions. I've seen time and time again people when I've accompanied families to housing court and trying to advocate for them, and it is an intimidating system, especially if you are a person, especially if you're a person of color, and having somebody else have attorneys there and the whole system, you don't know how to navigate, and you're stuck with a UD that is 7 years. And how are you as an individual supposed to care for your family and be able to find that affordable housing and be able to sustain it when a lot of landlords in this day and age don't necessarily have to rent to people with a UD anymore. It's no longer really a renter's market as much as we like to pretend it is, because we have so many apartments that are no longer affordable. I think that is one way is to look at how we navigate our housing court system for sure. How do we really put teeth into the laws of tenant rights for our tenants all across the state, especially here in 62B. I would look at that. I think also when we are talking about the affordable housing, where we say 10% of, if you build a complex, 10% has to be affordable housing. How do we raise that limit to be more than just 10%? So if you build up an apartment complex in the city for 10 units, only one of those 10 has to be, quote, affordable. I want to see a way where we can make that higher than just the 10% threshold that we have currently. I would say 30 to 40%, in some type of equitable way. I know of Section 8 and Section, I think it's 542 or whatnot. Those are laws that are pretty stringent, but I think we as a state, as a legislature, can be creative in ways of finding ways to encourage people to build their Section 8 housing, to accept Section 8 vouchers. Whether that, and I think that we should have some type of a tax credit for our homeowners and for our property owners who decide to do a Section 8. So if they have to replace an appliance or whatnot, or do some work to their house, that they get a dollar for dollar tax credit for some of this work that they do, to support families in those type of housing situations. I think thinking unconventionally, I think, is probably a good place to start. And I think we need to do more than what's required in terms of our housing situation. In terms of encampments, I think that, so on affordable housing, you have naturally occurring affordable housing that naturally occur. We have partnerships in the state where we can see, a lot of nonprofits that still, if they accept, government funding in some of these partnerships, they're laws they have to follow, and some of them can be quite monotonous. I've worked with some nonprofits where they're just like, we would have these built faster, but and then they explain what the types are, and then you see companies like Helix with the city of Minneapolis. That's a for-profit corporation that is housing people at a faster clip. And when it comes to encampments, I think it's twofold. I think, some people will argue that the Housing First initiative does not work, where, it's just rapid rehousing. You get them housed right away and everything else will fall into place. I've had to explain that way. I'm not sure if that works. I'm not into the weeds on that detail, but I do know that playing the whack-a-mole when it comes to encampments is not working. I think moving people in the whack-a-mole movement and dumping huge slabs of disintegrated concrete onto city land is just very intolerable. Where I come from as a Native person, we treat everyone as one as in community, and you lift those that need the help. And when it comes to encampments, these are people, I believe, and from what I was raised, these are people that need mental health supports, substance abuse. We have people that are there they're there for domestic violence reasons. They're there for many reasons, and we need a more concerted, hands-on effort to tackle these problems. And what the legislature can do, I believe, is not just give more money to counties and cities, but I think also to give more leniency to some of these rules that they currently have in place, that are currently in place, I should say, that sometimes do take a while in terms of turnaround time and getting someone placed in treatment, turnaround time in getting someone mental health services. And I know people are working as hard as they can to tackle these encampment issues, but I don't believe in criminalizing homelessness. I don't believe that we should be moving these encampments left and right. I get it. There's property owners and their rights as well. And there has to be, what the legislature can do is have some type of safeguards in place as well for our property owners. And what does that authentically really look like, instead of just giving lip service to that issue? But as far as where do we let these encampments pop up? Do we let them pop up on the greenway? Do we let them pop up in the parks? I would say absolutely not. Because those are public spaces where we have children, we have, and I get it, we have empty lots where they currently are as well. But I think, there's a fine line between that and property owners and their rights as well. So I think we have to really dig into the weeds on that. Is that the legislature's responsibility to do that at every single level? No, but I do believe it is the legislature's responsibility to oversee that, whether that's a task force or a committee or a whole sub-department of the Health and Human Services. I would have to explore that issue further. But on a local level, I just know that what we are doing right now is not working.
Thank you. A couple of follow-ups.
Sure.
Would you support an increase in the MinTIP grant?
Oh, absolutely. I've been on public assistance before. As a very young man, I've been on public assistance. Back when it was $437 a month, and it was $437 for till 4 or 5 years ago, maybe less than that. less than that. And I remember being on 437, and I had to have a church program help pay for the remainder of my rent.
Okay.
Through
That's been controversial, but I know Aisha Gomez has advocated for an increase.
I would support
the
it. I would
NTIP.
totally support an increase because, like I said, you cannot find a house for because now it's 537. And I know for a fact you cannot find an apartment anywhere. And so I was on 437, and I had to have a church help subsidize my rent for the time that I was on MFIP, as well as, food. They called it food support then, but now it's SNAP. And I would support having some expansion to, we had the PEBT during COVID, and we had a lot of families take advantage of it. And I think that we should have some type of program for that as well. I know we have the federal SNAP program. That's cool, fine, I get it. But also, I think we should look at something on a more state level as well. And I think that in this day and age, I think it is warranted. But I would totally support what Representative Gomez is proposing. Yes, definitely, because even 537 is not enough to make ends meet. Speaking from someone who's been on public assistance on MFIP as well. So thanks for the question.
Right. The other thing that's been talked about a lot and is controversial is the issues of rent stabilization, rent control. Both Minneapolis and St. Paul have had numerous discussions and actually referenda on these subjects. The legislature has a role in permitting cities to go these routes or limiting what the cities can do. Do you have any thoughts on that, or do you think that's a good idea? You think it's a bad idea?
I think it could be I think it could be a mixture of both. I think we could, again, leave it up to the city, but I think to the individual city. One, two, I think there could be. This might get a little murky, but I think another way that you could think about it would be to let the individual property owner decide if they want to institute their own mandatory, I shouldn't say mandatory, if they want to institute or cooperate with, say, a rent control policy, and say, I will follow, if it's a 3% rent increase or whatever the max is, I will follow that. But in return, I would like, a tax credit or something in something in return for keeping the rents low. I don't believe we should have it completely based on a free market principle, because where I live in Kingfield, there's where Kieran's used to be. There's a huge apartment complex that has gone up that doesn't quite match the neighborhood. It kind of sticks out. But I know that those rents there are not affordable. I couldn't even afford to live in there. And if there's rent control in place or some type of rent stabilization, then sure, I think more people would stay in the city, and we would be better off for it. I think expanding rent stabilization to our public, to MFIP, which I think could be tied into what Representative Gomez is proposing, I think could also work to keep some of our families here. But as far as the rent control, yes, I think it's correct in leaving it up to the cities. But I would like to have some type of extension or maybe a pilot project to see that, if some property owners would voluntarily say, yes, I will do that in exchange for whatever, a property tax credit or something. Because I know the free market doesn't work. I know back in the Plenty years, back then there was a huge, massive property tax cut, and the savings were supposed to be passed on to the renters, and that never materialized at all. I think that was like 2005, 2006 or whatever. And I remember that specifically because I was a renter at the time, and my rent just went up anyways. And that property tax cut just went to the property owner, and rents never went down as it was sold to the public. So I think there's a great danger in leaving it up to market-based principles like that, a free market, without having really strategic place guards set up for that, because that's what would happen if we went down that route again. I think, which is exactly what happened when Plenty was governor.
So I am a chief operating officer at Twin Cities Health Services, and what that would look like is I wear many hats in the organization. I do anything from HR to throwing out the trash to, bringing in new contracts to our organization. I had a client that was from the encampment, and my job is to help people navigate the services that we provide. And one of the issues was when she came in, she was without papers. She had it was the middle of winter. She was without health coverage. And she had hygiene issues that she was very self-conscious about. So we provided her with a care package that included hygiene items. We first addressed the lack of papers by helping her get her driver's license, her social security card, and then getting her enrolled in healthcare coverage. And as she spent some time in the treatment program, in a few months later, when she got a solid footing, we then helped her find employment. We helped her build out her resume and find employment and find stable, safe housing. So she's doing far better now. She's far into her recovery journey, and she is now a mentor to our current clients. So I see individuals as multidimensional, and we require a holistic approach in addressing the issues our community is facing and dealing with. So I would take this holistic lens that I have and go into the State House to develop holistic policies that would address the root causes and uplift our community.
So I think when you're talking about encampments, housing, and poverty, you're talking about three issues that are pretty closely interrelated, but maybe have slightly different approaches that are required for each. And of course, poverty being a larger overarching topic. I'd like to start with encampments. So when encampments were forming in Powderhorn Park in 2020, which is right across the street from where I live not far from Lake in Chicago, I joined the Hennepin team that was working to support expanding shelter capacity during the pandemic. We had to create more social distancing within Hennepin County funded shelters, and that resulted in a loss of beds during the beginning of the crisis and made it all the more important that we add shelter beds during that time. And I'm proud to say that I was part of the group that helped open Avivo Village. Avivo Village is a 100-bed tiny home facility inside of a larger warehouse in the North Loop neighborhood. It employs a number of harm reduction models. For example, folks are not allowed to use substances on site, but if they use off site and come back, they're not removed from the space or kicked out of the shelter, like is true for so many shelter settings. People are able to bring their pets into Avivo Village with them, which is a barrier for many folks seeking shelter, is thinking that they're going to have to surrender their pets at Avivo Village. That's not necessary. They can bring them in. And then people can also seek shelter at Avivo Village with their romantic partner or adult child. Many shelter settings force folks to enter different facilities for different populations in different settings. And in Avivo Village, if romantic partners enter, they will get assigned separate units, but many couples use one unit as a living room and one unit as a bedroom, and are able to seek shelter together in that setting. And the model is working. Over 200 people have transitioned from unsheltered homelessness to transitional housing through their experience at Avivo Village. And something like 90% of the people who transition are stable in that housing still 6 months later. So we have a model that works. It is costly. It is staff intensive and resource intensive, but that only makes sense. I mean, the people that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness have problems, have issues, have barriers that are making them unstable in the housing situation that they left or were forced out of before needing to seek shelter. And Vivo Village is only funded currently through 2025. If elected, I will work very hard to make sure that it has a permanent funding stream because I don't believe we'll have solved unsheltered homelessness by 2025. And I think we need to open another similar setting, ideally in South Minneapolis, ideally where folks are already congregating and seeking shelter and seeking community. I think probably 40 to 60 beds makes more sense than 100. We've gotten some feedback from Avivo staff that 100 is a bit much to manage. And I think we should be continuing to pursue harm reduction models and making sure that people feel ready to come inside. I think one of the biggest reasons why we have folks still outside is we have shelter settings that they don't feel comfortable entering, and that people would rather be outside than be in that shelter. We need to make our shelter settings places where people want to go to receive the care, support, treatment that they need in order to move on to the next step. When you're talking about housing, I think that the state legislature has a couple of important roles to play here. One is I would want to remove any state barriers or limitations to local municipalities pursuing rent stabilization. I think that's an important topic that local municipalities should be able to take up to protect renters against the worst excesses and worst tendencies of some landlords in our community. To raise rent dramatic rates in order to force people out of housing. That's an unacceptable antisocial practice. And I think communities should have the ability to make decisions for themselves on how and when to pursue rent stabilization. I think also, though, that we need to continue to fund the construction and preservation of affordable housing. There was $1 billion in housing bonds passed last session. That's an excellent one-time allocation. However, one-time money is not going to dig us out of the long-term disinvestment we've seen in public housing and affordable housing since at least the 1980s. So we need to continue to identify good projects, get them funded with housing dollars from the state, and we need to continue to work towards securing permanent, ongoing sources of funding for affordable housing. That's why I'm proud to have worked on and advocated for the metro area affordable housing sales tax that passed last session, which will be providing $200 million a year each year moving forward to communities across the metro and tailored towards investments in creation of new housing, preservation of current affordable housing, and rental assistance to make sure people are stable in those units. And then you talked about poverty, and I think that the best way we can be moving forward on addressing poverty in our community is to be raising wages for workers. I mean, many people who live in poverty are working, but they are earning wages that are not living wages. And I think we need to be moving towards that. That's why I'm proud to say that one of the planks in my platform and one of the things I'm advocating for is a $20 an hour minimum wage statewide. I don't have a lot of confidence that that will pass quickly at the state legislative level, but I think we can take an important step forward in the next session or two to make sure that all state employees and contractors are paid $20 an hour as a minimum wage. And I would want to work towards raising wages for workers across sectors. We are experiencing a time in America of almost unprecedented corporate power and concentration of power among the wealthy. And we need more advocates in the state legislature who will always be on the side of workers. And I can guarantee that I will always be fighting for working class people from communities like the one I emerged from. And so that would be the way that I would approach poverty most directly, is by working to raise wages.
The environment, climate change, resources in the city. The legislature does play a role in funding transit, and the governor's set a goal for having been carbon free by 2040. Do you think that's realistic? Do you think that could happen? Do you think more needs to happen? Do you believe in climate change
Yeah, for sure. I think the science is sound on it. It it is it is climate change is happening. I say this based on my own personal experience, lived experience, of course, like many other people. Um, put it this way: in the last 8 7 8 years that we have lived here in our house, um, in 3 of those Februarys, I've been able to walk around Lake Harriet in February. In 3 of the last 8 years that we have lived here, in shorts and a t-shirt. And before that, never. I've never worn shorts ever before that time when it's been 55 degrees in February. That's just me putting it as simple as in the most simplest terms of climate change. Um, you're seeing it in the amount of sunburn related incidences in our hospitals and our clinics with our children who are outside all summer long, who there never used to be that high incidences of sunburn in the summertime. You're seeing it in our shorter winters. I mean, look outside right now, and it is happening. You're seeing it in our winters. You're seeing it in our summers. You're seeing it with the earlier and earlier return of our fowl life, whether that's geese or ducks or whatnot. Our migration patterns are changing here in the state of Minnesota, as well as worldwide. You're seeing animals coming out of hibernation earlier than before, and I've read more than once that that's becoming the norm, and that is why you're seeing more animals earlier, and you're seeing them starting to move into the city because they're hungry. I could go on, but climate change is real, and I think the state, yes, we can definitely be carbon free by 2040. I know there's always, people always set benchmarks and this and that. And in my culture, we take care of our land, we take care of the animals, and we, with respect to nature. I mean, that's just the way I was raised, and this way my dad was raised up in Red Lake, Minnesota, and we live that way currently today as well. We are one of the rare. I don't know how many homes do it, but we recycle more than we have garbage. I don't know if that's the norm or if that's becoming the norm, but in our household, that's what we do, and we compost. And so we try to do as much as we can here at home. I think what the Senate or what the state legislature could do is encourage cities to go to more recyclable programs. I think we can do that on a couple of different fronts. I think one of the things for going carbon is restricting, our emissions, obviously our emissions, but also too restricting, in accelerating the use of recyclables and compostables on a city or municipal level. And how do we pay for that? How do we restructure that? Well, we can do that. I think one way we could do that is, again, looking at how we fund local government aid and how we disperse that. Again, local government aid, LGA, is a tool that is used based on population. And how do we fund that, and how do we disperse that, and how do we calculate that for our cities to use, and what can we put in there to make sure that if cities are voluntarily encouraging more recycling and more composting than using garbage, I think that is one way that we can incentivize that through LGA as supplemental funding. I know what LGA is already used for, but I think we could increase other ways of using that as well. And we could also, look at that funding formula for housing as well. I know, again, LGA took a hit during the years of plenty. Some would say Ventura, and it has been, looked at over the years. But I think that's one way we could start. But carbon free, yes, the technology is there to be carbon free by 2040. Technology is constantly changing. and rapidly accelerating. I mean, take a look at cell phones from just 3 or 4 years ago to today, for example, cars. I mean, there's the technology is there to do it. We just have to do more than what's required to get there. And that's been kind of my catch, my phrase for this campaign is we should be doing more than what's required. And I think if we really, came together, we could be there before 2040. I honestly really think we could.
Absolutely believe climate change is real. We have a responsibility to care for our next generation. And so there is a crisis and we need to take immediate action. I grew up in Phillips, and there were times where we would get a wind of this foul odor and nobody knew where it was coming from or what it was. And, I would get nervous about it as a kid sometimes and ask, what is that smell? And, the adults would say, it's nothing, you're fine, it's normal. I stopped asking about that. But I do remember one time driving in the car with my dad, and the smell came through the AC of the car, and he could tell I got nervous, and he just shut the vents until, the smell we drove past it. I don't know what that has done to us and that's what we need to look into. We need to care for our environment and we need to care for our communities. Now that I'm older and I make more income and choose where to live, I live in Powderhorn and I love it. It's clean and it's safe. I choose to spend my free time having fun in the creek area. I enjoy Minnehaha Falls. I love the sound of the water. I enjoy the stairs that make me out of breath, and like the open fields. So there is this huge disparity in our district from the north to the south, and there is an injustice that requires our attention. Representative Holden Hassan has done amazing. She has worked tirelessly for our community in working on these injustices. She's put in so much effort into the roof depot and has asked me to keep an eye on it. So I would love to continue her legacy and the work that she's done for our community and ensuring that we care for our environment because everyone deserves clean air and clean water.
So first off, to your question of do I think climate change is real? There's a quote that I really appreciate, which is the great thing about science is it doesn't matter what you think, it is true, and it is observable and it is repeatable. It doesn't matter what I think necessarily. Climate change is real. I happen to think climate change is real and happening. Like many of my neighbors, I am both enjoying the opportunity to be outside and be comfortable in a Minnesota winter, and also experiencing a deep sense of unease about what that means for the years to come. I have a daughter who turns 2 in April, and I would really like for her to be able to experience the recreational opportunities here in Minneapolis and across Minnesota that I've been able to experience, and want them to look something like what I experienced when she gets a chance to. And I don't have that sense of confidence right now. I think the legislature took some robust action last session, and there are some far-sighted leaders that are serving in the legislature right now that helped get that passed and ushered those changes in, including a move to transition to carbon-free economy by 2040. I think that's excellent work that was undertaken, and we have much further to go. We have not bent the curve enough yet. So I am interested in investments in clean energy across the state and making the transition away from fossil fuels in our energy sector much more rapid. I'm also interested in making sure that investments in improved transit infrastructure and service are accelerated. In particular, Metro Transit secured another $500 million a year last year in ongoing transit funding through the metro area transit sales tax that passed. And we need to get those dollars allocated and spent. We need drivers hired and trained. And we need to be building bus rapid transit infrastructure in particular with the easy swipe fare stations outside of the bus at the station, with the elevated platforms, with the longer reticulating buses to increase capacity. I believe we need in our own community. I believe we deserve that type of improved service and bus rapid transit on Cedar Avenue. I would fight to see bus rapid transit service allocated and programmed for Lindale Avenue, for Nicollet Avenue, for 38th Street. We live in a densely populated urban community, and we should be in a place where many families feel comfortable moving from a 2-car household to a 1-car household, or a 1-car household to no cars. If that's something they so choose to do, because they know that the transit service is reliable, it's frequent, it's accessible, and it gets them where they want to go. And I believe our South Minneapolis communities deserve that level of investment. Suburban commuter lines are great, and I'm hopeful Metro Transit continues to build out a regional system as well, but we need better service here in the core urban areas, and I will be an advocate for that at all times. And then in terms of preserving our natural resources in Minnesota, I'm a supporter of the Prove It First legislation and a model for making sure that potentially polluting industries are able to clearly demonstrate their ability to prevent harm to communities from their practices before we start issuing permits and leases. There's a long legacy of environmental degradation in Minnesota, and the costs of cleaning up are way more than the costs of not making the mess in the first place. And I think we need to be taking a legislative approach that, make sure that future generations are not continuing to pay billions and billions and billions of dollars to clean up messes we are making today.
Yeah, we had. Hold on, it was 50. It was 60 degrees 2 weeks ago. Of course, I believe in climate change, and we're witnessing it as we see. But I've been a youth worker for the last 25 years, and so that's what my onus and my priority has been. But the youth that I work with need a clean environment. The youth that I work with need a healthy planet to live in and be prosperous and to raise their kids in. And so there are a couple of polluters inside of Minneapolis, like the Smith Foundry and the hurt that we really need to address and figure out how the ways we can close that, so the folks who are living in those areas can have clean air to breathe and not suffering from higher asthma rates than everybody else in the city. So there's the things that we can do. I'm not like I have a team of folks who really school me on environmental causes. I really believe that our planet is in peril, and we need to do everything we need to do to keep it out of peril.
Well, education's a big part of the state budget, and there's a lot of discussion of education policy that goes on at the state.
Yeah.
So, it's incumbent upon me to ask anybody running for the legislature, what do you think of the state funding formula, and what role do you think the state should play in education, and what do you think should happen?
I think last session was the first time that the education folks really got what they were asking for, to properly really fund our schools properly, and try to put a curtail on the bleed of families leaving out of Minneapolis public schools. I think we need to find ways to create needs assessments for our different schools, because the per pupil model doesn't really work for folks in the big city. If people are leaving our schools and the public schools have to deal with stuff that charter schools and other schools don't have to deal with. And so if folks are leaving our public schools to go to charter schools, and the charter schools don't have to deal with kids with IEPs, that it kind of handicaps our public schools a little bit more by taking money out of our public schools and making them not as good. And some charter schools are pretty good, and they show those as examples, but a lot of them aren't doing really good. A lot of them are failing our young folks, and we need to really double down on our public schools and making sure our public schools are the best that they can be. And also, we got to fund our schools properly. We got to make sure our teachers are paid properly. We have about 40,000 teachers in the state of Minnesota who have teaching licenses who aren't teaching, and we have a teacher shortage. So the reason that they're not teaching is because the environment in the schools have become unbearable for some of our teachers. So we need to talk about the environment of our education system and making sure our teachers are paid properly, because they're going to different professions, they're going to different industries, and we need our teachers. We need the folks who are guiding our young folks into into adulthood.
Thanks. Yeah, I think first off, I'm really grateful that we have a DFL trifecta in the state that really pushed the needle and increased funding for our special education, and English language learners. Um, and for Minneapolis Public Schools, what that's done is that we have been paying for special education, which is an unfunded federal mandate that is passed on to the state, which is then passed on to individual school districts. And so that money comes out of our general fund to pay for special education services. And we are not required to do that, but we do it anyways because it is the morally and ethically right thing to do. And we've been doing that for years. And so for the legislature, for Governor Walz and the DFL controlled legislature to really move the needle on that has just made an immense difference in students' lives, not just in Minneapolis Public Schools, but across the state, exponentially for sure. But we're not quite there yet. I think, continuing to pressure on the federal level to fund Title I services, but also on the state. We're not there yet, but we are on an excellent, fantastic start to getting to where we need to be, and it's about time. I think also with English language learners, we are seeing, at least in my experience in Minneapolis Public Schools, is an influx of immigrant students and refugees. We're seeing them from all over Central America, South America, Afghanistan, and other points in the world. We are just seeing an influx of them. And the state funding formula for that has to be changed. And it has been. We did receive a generous amount, moving the needle again. But I think it needs to be on par with where special education is in terms of funding. And I think we can get there. And I think that the investment is wise. And when you combine those two resources in the terms of funding, we see an influx and an uptick in our scores and in terms of our services offered to our students who need those services. So for that I think educationally, those are two good starts where we are. The governor's literacy program, I think, is right on point. I think we need to continue to move into literacy. Literacy affects every intersection of life, whether you are a doctor, police officer, social worker, school teacher, obviously, anywhere in life, literacy is required, and we need people to recognize that and make that wise investment into that realm of where we are. In terms of funding, yes, we are funded now at 3% is the max adjusted for inflation. I also serve on the Minnesota School Boards Association, and their legislative agenda, along with AMSD, which is Area Metro School Districts, and Minneapolis Public Schools, has been pushing for 5%, at least 5% per pupil increase adjusted to inflation. So again, that's another heavy lift that I think is upcoming. It's one that I totally support, that I totally understand. And that would be also a game changer. So if you have those three things lined up together, funding for special education, English language learners, as well as our per pupil basic funding formula to 5%, that it would be a game changer, not just here in Minneapolis, but in the metro area and outstate Minnesota. It really would. Because I think a lot of people, there are districts across the state that are majority students of color. And those are a lot of small rural districts. And they need those funding dollars as well. And I think moving the needle on those 3 points that I had mentioned, I think will do wonders. That also comes into our funding for homeless and highly mobile students, which also again goes back to our partnership with Minneapolis and Hennepin County, and giving school districts, I think, the flexibility of having referendums, of renewing a referendum one time without voter support. While I do support that, I think that would be, I think that use of just a one-time use, I think should remain. I don't believe in a continual renewal, because some people have said, we should just have a continual renewal of the existing property tax levy for school districts. I would leave it where it is as one time. If people have said, adjusted for inflation, I don't agree with that. I still think we need to go to the public and be accountable and being transparent in that. And sometimes I think when we articulate that those discussions, I think we could do a little bit better job of being transparent. Because I know in my current position, I've had those questions and those conversations. But I think in terms of those educational goals, and you're talking about other things such as opting out of standardized test scores. I think we could do a better job of alerting parents' rights. Because not everything, does cost money. I think there's some laws that we could strengthen as well, as such as the Minnesota Parent Notification Act, which is, again, tied to the environment. It's one where it's a law that's passed that lets parents know that if we are putting chemicals on your kids' sports field, or even on the grass where they walk on into the building, what is being treated with. And I think, tightening up those laws, I think also leads to more or less reliance on chemicals and more of being accountable and transparent on the educational level. I think there's a bill out there to provide, give school districts the flexibility of having 4-day school weeks. I know during COVID, there was a few districts that did have that. And again, is that a local decision? I think that should be a local decision. That does not work for every school district. But again, I think some of the things the legislature can do is from a more of a macro level than it is a local level. And I think decisions like that should be made on a local level. But I think that the legislature is right in saying, let's take a look at this and let's see if a district is willing to try that out. By all means, let them try that out because they know their community better. Will that work in Minneapolis public schools? No, I don't believe it will. We've looked at that issue, but I know in outstate Minnesota, some communities have said yes. So I think, when you're talking about education funding, and that is also part of it too, is some of these districts have said, well, if we have a 4-day week, we could have, there would be cost savings to us, et cetera. But I think, again, that's also a funding issue. But going back to the original funding things, special education, English language learner, and increasing our funding, our basic funding formula per pupil to at least 5%. Because 5% even now still would not keep up with inflation. But that's a starting point.
My mom, she wanted us to have the best education. It's one reason why she moved to the state of Minnesota, and she didn't have an education past the age of 8, so she really valued education. So she put us in Minneapolis public schools and then moved us to Eagan to put us in Eagan public schools, So I have seen the difference between Minneapolis public schools, which one, you are a student sharing an outdated textbook with another student in class, and the other, in Egan public schools, you're given a brand new textbook that you get to take home for the entire year. And then you have teachers in Minneapolis public schools who are paying out of pocket to buy pencils and construction paper for their students. What benefited me didn't benefit the system. As students are leaving Minneapolis public schools, this is hurting Minneapolis public schools. And so as a state legislature, my focus will be to abundantly fund our Minneapolis public schools so that students receive the quality education that they deserve, and that teachers receive the pay that they deserve and the appreciation that they deserve.
Well, I'm a strong advocate for public education. My mom was a 27-year public school teacher. She was involved in served on the executive board of her teachers union local. And I grew up in an environment that was proud of public schools and the education that was provided in public schools. I attended public schools all the way through graduating from high school. And I want my daughter to attend public schools here in Minneapolis as well. I think that we have observed in Minnesota the deleterious effects of especially the Pawlenty administration in cuts to education funding. I think last session's increase, I think it was a 10.3% per capita increase in student funding for public schools, is an excellent investment. When the state doesn't step in and fund education, then districts have to rely on local property tax collection, and we now know that property tax collection is very regressive, and that wealthier districts are able to collect it more easily, and poor districts really struggle. And so, by shifting the burden off of the state and onto local districts, we deepen the racial inequities that we experience in the delivery of education across the state. Now, that being said, that increase is great. And also, we're not back to the levels of funding education in Minnesota that we were at in the late 80s and early 90s, especially adjusted for inflation. And I think we need to return to that level of commitment. I also think that we need to be guaranteeing that there's good funding for special education and for English language learning, as well as general education funding. And I think that there have been times in the past where they've all been lumped under the same formula, and legislators have perhaps patted themselves on the back for a marginal increase when at times they may not have known that they were actually defunding general education because of the cost increases in those specific areas. And I've observed that we started taking our transit investments a lot more seriously in the years after Metro Mobility was pulled out of the mainline Metro Transit budget and considered by legislators on its own. And I'd like to consider the same for English language learning and special education, and make sure that legislators know how rapidly those needs are growing, especially in the wake of the pandemic, and with an influx of migrant communities of economic refugees that are joining us. And that they look at those numbers, that they fund those areas of education appropriately, and also provide appropriate increases for general education as well for K through 12. Those are some of the ways that I would want to kind of change the conversation around funding for K-12. I believe that we should be extending our commitment to Minnesota's young people from grade 12 up to grade 16. I think that we should be investing in free tuition for all Minnesota students and young people at Minnesota State colleges and universities. Again, that's a big lift. We're going to have to take some steps along the way to get there. But I think that a high school degree is no longer anything near a guarantee of a middle class living lifestyle in Minnesota. And a 2-year degree isn't, and honestly, a 4-year degree isn't. But I think we need to be making a commitment to young people that we will support them through their educational journey up to grade 16, whether that happens in a university setting, a trade or vocational school setting, an apprenticeship setting. I think we need to be extending our commitment to Minnesota's young people that we will have their education covered if they seek to pursue higher education along the way. And then I think the last piece that is connected to this that isn't as addressed yet is the rising costs of childcare and the burden that it places on families. And the fact that when we don't have robust support for people to attend formal childcare settings, there are children that may not be in the best setting for their childcare. They may be in a setting that is unsafe. I think there's certainly young people that are in childcare settings that we may not be seeing that they're having the same educational opportunities during that very important first 5 years of brain development that they otherwise deserve. I believe Senator Aaron McQuaid has a bill that would cap childcare expenses at 7% of a family's income. I very much support that approach of finding ways to cap childcare expenses for families and making sure that every child in Minnesota has the chance to access safe and educational childcare opportunities during those crucial early years of brain development. And I think that it's also a way that we could be addressing poverty, a topic that came up earlier. A decent number of the workers in Minnesota who are living in poverty are childcare workers, and they're disproportionately women, they're disproportionately young, they're disproportionately supporting families themselves, and we need to be making sure that they are paid fair wages. And I think that having robust public subsidies for childcare will enable childcare providers to pay better wages to their workers. So I think there's a win-win-win to be found in this space related to education as well.
We've got the right, to organize. We've got the right, to protest lies. We've got the right, to survive, to make it right. We've got the right, to make it right. We've got the right. From the start of our country, from the start, fighting tyranny, from the start, the promise to be free, to make it right. We've got the right, to make it right. We've got the right. We've organized, down through the years. We've organized, blood, sweat, and tears. We've organized, freedoms we hold dear, to make it right. We've got the right, to make it right. We've got the right. At the heart of democracy, at the heart, responsibility, at the heart, it's up to you and me to make it right. We've got the right, to make it right. We've got the right. We've got the right, to organize. We've got the right, to protest lies. We've got the right, eyes on the prize, to make it right. We've got the right, to make it right. We've got the right.